Okay. So, hello everybody. My name's Robert Douglas. I'm here today with my colleague Andrew. We've traveled from Cologne to do an event with Leap here today, where we're going to be talking to some joint existing customers and prospective customers, in particular about the platform as a service solution that we've developed called Platform.sh. And I'm going to start the talk about Platform.sh today with a little bit of the philosophical background of why we built this product and what we hope to eventually achieve with it. We achieved some of that already with the product, but it gives you more of an understanding of where we're going with it. And as web developers, you'll all find a lot of the challenges that I mentioned familiar to your everyday life, I'm pretty sure. So with that, I'll just jump in. I've named the presentation OCD deployment because, you know, when you build something big and you invest a lot of time doing it, it really sucks when deploying it goes wrong. And this is, you know, in some form or another familiar to everybody who's ever tried to launch a complicated web application. And the goal of Platform.sh is to avoid moments like that. The, you know, even though it's far less physical in our cases, the emotional constricting of your heart and your sick feeling in your stomach when you've just deployed something that breaks the customer's website and it's completely offline and the phone's ringing. I hope you've never been there, but if you have been there, then you know how important it is to think about the deployment process quite a lot. So we start the philosophical investigation of the topic by looking at what we mean when we talk about a web application. When we talk about a web application, we specifically talk about the trinity of code, infrastructure, and data as one unit in a moment of time where all three of those things have to be there to work together, or you don't actually have a web application. Sure, a web application from a developer's point of view is very largely the code. That's where you're, you know, in there mucking around. Or from a sysadmin's point of view, it's the infrastructure. Provision the servers and it'll work. But we actually all know that if you're using infrastructure that's different than production or data that's different than production, then your code can be running perfectly, but not really give you an indication about what's going to happen when you deploy. And when we talk about deployment, of course, we're not just talking about that final moment where you throw everything on the live site, but we're talking about the whole workflow, local, dev, stage, prod. You've got all of these different environments that you're working on, you're testing on, and you're moving things in between the environments. Sometimes you're moving code upstream, sometimes you're moving data downstream so that you've got representative local data. And we all know that this right there is also a fantasy, that there's no such thing as dev, stage, prod. It's actually more like this in reality, especially since Git has come along and made branching entire code base cheap and easy. So we make lots of branches and we have lots of people's dev servers or local laptops that are approximating some version of the application more or less accurately. So this is what we mean when we say deployment. Because, I mean, the analogy is so great, especially with Docker these days, latching onto shipping boats. It's really painful when this process goes wrong, and it can be dangerous to your existence. So let this not happen to you. So what does OCD deployment mean? So when I say that, I mean orchestrated, consistent, and deterministic deployment. So let's pick that apart. Orchestrated, by definition, in English, means planned to produce a desired effect, a desired effect. And in the world of application development and deployment, it specifically means you're provisioning servers, storage, network, you're launching specific services like web servers and databases on them. Then you're deploying code and data, populating the database, moving files into place. And then you have to also orchestrate monitoring, do maintenance, and manage changes to the infrastructure. That's orchestration. in a typical PHP web application, that might mean things like HA proxy, Nginx, PHP, FPM, MariaDB, Postgres, MongoDB. Maybe there's a Node.js server sitting next to a Solr, Elasticsearch, Redis, or Memcache. But look, that's a lot of services, and making all of those highly available, all of them accessing persistent storage, and then replicating that through all of those many environments that you have, that's a lot of orchestration in a modern web application. With Platform.sh, our philosophy is that from the developer's point of view, you want to be able to manage and control that orchestration in a very declarative way. This is an example of one of the files that you edit to orchestrate some services on Platform. When you type these 3 lines, you end up with a running MySQL service. When you type those 2 lines, you end up with a running Redis service. And you can choose from a menu of services that are available that include things like MongoDB, Postgres, Elasticsearch, soon to be Node.js, soon to be we've got like 8 to 10 services now that you can choose from. Our target is to be by 30 to 40 services by the end of the year. So basically you'll be able to just go in, change this YAML file, and for your environment, you'll have changed all of the services available for your application. And then configuring them is also declarative. So in this example, I mentioned that you had to provision local storage, persistent storage for your application. That's what you see in the first 3 lines there. It's just declaring where your mount points are supposed to be relative to application root. And then your application can write to those. And that'll follow you around through all of the different environments. So we make it very simple to take care of some of those concerns. When I say consistent, it means English, acting or done in the same way over time. It means that when you do your deployment through all of those dev, stage, local, prod, whatever environments, and you're moving code, you're moving data in between them, you always want to use the same tool. And what we're seeing, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, is that the world is quickly converging on a very consistent way to do deployment, and that is to git push. Okay, you simply git push to some service somewhere, and magic happens, and your application is deployed. So that's the way CloudShift works, for example. I think Heroku works the same way. That's the way Platform.sh works. And it makes it very nice for you as a developer because you're always pushing code, okay, to some remote somewhere, whether it's GitHub or your dev server or your stage server. It's a familiar operation to you. You know what it means. There's no learning curve involved. And if, as a side effect, you deploy an entire infrastructure of services and get a copy of your persistent data, then it's kind of like an extra bonus. And it has to be consistent on every environment with all the tools that you use, and hopefully also consistent infrastructure and actual application data. So, enough slides. Deterministic, OCD. Deterministic. For every event, there exists conditions that could cause no other event. Meaning, when you take an action, git push, you have a guarantee you know the outcome of that action. You might not be able to predict it in your mind because you might have a bug, right? You might have misconfigured something and you only find that out when you push, but at least there's a guarantee that if you pushed that same thing 10 minutes later or on a different environment, it's going to behave exactly the same way. Very important. And Platform takes that a step further. It actually looks at the hash of your code base, including the configuration files, the YAML files that I showed you. And if you push that same code base hash to a different environment, it doesn't even rebuild it. It just takes the LVM squash file system copy of it and beams it over there. So the consistency or the deterministic level of the deployment is so high that it's actually deploying the same disk image, basically. Very, very deterministic. You know, once you've reached an outcome using your deployment, it's going to have that same outcome over and over and over again. So after you've done the dev and you've put it up into the sprint, and the sprint's gone into QA, and the QA's put it onto staging, and staging then goes to production, every one of those deployments is going to have exactly the same outcome, which is one of the goals behind Platform. To make that work really well, sorry, there's a Drupal-specific example in there. I don't think you guys do so much Drupal, but a lot of Symfony work, a lot of PHP. To make that work, we have a very strong sense of the application build time, meaning not only will it run Composer for you, but it'll also look for requirements coming from NPM, pip, Ruby gems, etc., and resolve all of those as well, and allow you to run scripts using those tools at build time and provision time so that you can do things like compile, less, SAS, do grunt, bower stuff that might be needed to move your code into the right places for deployment. And that will also be deterministic. So once you've got that set up and you've done a git push and it's done the build for the application, you know that that exact version of the application is then going to be deployed every step along the way. So it's this concept of determinism, however, extends not just to your code. Git basically gives us a very way to fairly well guarantee that the same code is going to end up on your production server as you have on your development server. That's the least problem. But what's really hard is making sure that it's also extending to the infrastructure. And this is where you have things like Puppet Chef, Ansible to help you out, and Vagrant for your local box. Platform actually manages that all for you so that you've got the guarantee that the code base that you're dealing with always describes a very deterministic infrastructure. And when you deploy that code base to any environment, the environment will rebuild itself with that infrastructure. So it might have been running on MySQL before you pushed to it, but if you told it to change to Postgres, it will actually launch a Postgres instead of a MySQL. That's a really extreme example that it ignores the data import-export aspect of it, but all I wanted to express is that the code base determines the infrastructure, and therefore as you move it through different environments, you get the practice of deploying new infrastructure along with your application code. And then one of the hardest things about making an OCD deployment is the application data. So application data is in many forms. It's the database, it's the files that you've uploaded like images, it's files that the web server has written that might be cache or configuration files but aren't in your code base, and it's also generated persistent storage for things like Solr, where it might be a Solr index, and if you're going to deploy through different environments and you want that to be deterministic, you actually need that data to be there as well. And the archetypical paradigm for managing data is to take data from production and bring it down through the branches while code is moving up through the branches, and Platform does that for you. And it does it really quickly. So if you have 10, 15 gigabytes of application data in your application in production and you want to set up a new development environment, Platform can do that for you, and it'll be ready for you to start working with within just a couple of minutes, even though the MySQL dump and import of that database might take hours otherwise. So you save a lot of time using the underlying Platform technologies when you're spinning up new environments, and you actually get real application data every time you do it. So OCD deployment is not a MySQL dump and MySQL import. There are so many problems with that it's almost useless for fast-moving applications. Let's say you're running a photo community and people are always uploading photos. Then if you start in MySQL dump on a 10 gigabyte database, then you're going to have 1,000 photos that have been uploaded in the meantime that aren't represented in your database by the time you're done, but those files are on the file system. Likewise, if you take a MySQL dump from a point of time, the same dump, and take the same files, in the same time, maybe some people have deleted files. So you have MySQL records for those files, no files on the file system because you've got these inconsistencies. Platform solves that by moving all application to data together as one unit. So you get your Solr index, you get your files, you get your database within a couple minutes, even if they're big, ready to go, and they're in a consistent state with each other. So here's a bit of a video that shows you just how a new Platform project is set up. And after the slide wherein videos are done, then I'm actually going to jump in and do a little bit of demo and then open it up for questions right at the end. But as you can see, we help you along with Symfony, WordPress, and Drupal projects, but you can run any PHP project. So I'm going to choose Drupal because I made this video for a Drupal crowd, but I've got a Symfony project and queued up for the live example. And in case you were ever curious, the video is actually going to show you what it looks like to install Drupal 8, so we're just going to have to all be amazed because I don't think this is really terribly relevant for your business, but it's very fast, the deployment of Drupal 8, as you saw. I mean, it was literally 2 seconds long. So here's the interesting part. One of the key innovations of Platform as a service is that it really thinks into the developer's world and the team world of an agency, and it says for every Git branch, you're going to be able to have a copy of your application with all of the OCD deployment characteristics. You're going to have your application data from production, you're going to have the infrastructure from production, and you're going to have that in minutes. So within, this took me literally 5 minutes to do this, I'm going to set up a master, staging, sprint, and then feature branch workflow that works really well like with a Git flow methodology, or basically any Git workflow that you work with on your team. And then every developer or team of developers can start working on their feature branch. They can merge that into the sprint branch. There can be a governance there by the Scrum Master who's going to do QA and check that. That can be merged into the staging branch. Every developer that you work with can have their own set of permissions per branch. So you can give your stakeholders the permission to look at the QA branch, or if you've got an external agency that's doing theme work or design work of some sort, you can give them Git push permissions to their own branch. You could even do outsourcing where you hire another agency and they can set up their own entire Git workflow, and they can make all of their branches, all of their environments, but then you've got a gate of governance before they can merge their stuff back in. So then I should have pushed pause, but what you're seeing on the screen here is actually, I'm going to commit some code. This is also Drupal specific using a Drupal make file. But I'm now at the local level, and I'm using our CLI tool, which is a Symfony console app that we've built that exposes the entire API for Platform. So what it will do locally for me, what you're seeing here, is it will go through the entire application build process locally so that I've got a copy of my application locally, and it's going to mirror exactly what it does online. So yeah, and then you get that in the logs there. I think that's probably enough of that. And then I talked a little bit about how you might try and build some of that yourself, but these tools that you're probably familiar with, you probably don't know Calabox, that's Drupal specific, they don't take the entire development workflow into consideration, and most of them don't have a good solution for the persistent data aspect of it, and making all of the bits of persistent data consistent with the infrastructure at every step along the way. And when you use Platform and do OCD deployment, then our goal is, our hope is, that every time you build something massive and you've got that breathtaking moment when you actually launch it, well, that it actually, even if it seems like it's not going to work or seems impossible for it to go right, well, hopefully that you've got the support and the tools so that will, and that ship won't sink. So. Okay, so that was enough of that. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes showing you the real live software because slides are boring. And then we'll have 5 minutes left for questions. So here's a very simple demonstration. It's this to-do app. I've been working with it, organizing my life for the day, eat breakfast, go to Leap, give a presentation. I can just about cross that one off, and lunch should be coming up. So if we look back, this is on a branch called staging. And you've seen that it's got some persistent data. It's got a database there. If I wanted to start a development workflow on that, I'd probably go into a sprint, and I'd make it. I could also make the new branch. Nope. we have an AngularJS authentication bug that I always forget, and if my application window has been open for very long, I've lost my session, but it doesn't reflect that. There we go. So what I'm doing when I do that branch, and I could have also done that just from Git by pushing a new branch to the origin, or with the CLI tool by creating a new branch, it will, within a couple minutes, it will create a completely new working version of the application, and it will have all those characteristics that I mentioned. It'll have a complete copy of the application data. It'll have an exact copy of all of the running services that I've chosen as a developer, and it will execute all of the application building steps in the background that you need. So it'll get all my composer dependencies, it will run scripts, it will compile lessons, SAS, and stuff if I had needed it. And that gives me a great level of consistency. And within that minute that I was talking about it, I now have a new copy of that application, and you can see the application data is there. And then I could go in and I could develop on that and deploy something. So the CLI tool that we have, that's probably way too small for you to see, but that's probably a little bit better, is called Platform. And if I show you just a representation of the commands that you've got, you can see that it very largely mirrors the entire API of a whole platform as a service. This is very useful because this makes your continuous integration efforts very fruitful. If you want to use Jenkins or Bamboo or some other tool to run all sorts of automated tests, you can do it by hooking up your Jenkins with this tool, or the Jenkins can be also taught to speak the native hypermedia REST API that we interface that Platform exposes as well. If I do something like, if I wanted to change the license, that's probably a safe, demoable change. Push that up there, then you can see, yeah, we ran into this yesterday, didn't we? You can see the process that it goes through as it builds this application online. So it's found composer JSON. This is online. I'm just getting the logs, console output piped back to me. It's found composer JSON. It's going to get all the JSON dependencies, so it's going to download all of those new. And then it's going to run a number of scripts that this Symfony application needs, like clearing the cache, removing the dev versions of applications. It's going to run those in the background, and once it's done that, it packs it onto a read-only file system, because the philosophy from a security point of view is that your code should not be modified once it's been deployed. That's the deterministic aspect. And it puts that read-only file system into use in the environment that it's got built according to the services that you need. So we'll just let that run a little bit. So it's deploying that. I can also follow along with the same, well, I'm too late. It's already finished, but I would have been able to see that. Oh, did I? You're so correct. It's also finished here. But there's the log here, and you can, as a team, you can see people's activities in real time, because it's a nice little AngularJS app. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions because we're coming up to my time limit, so go ahead.
Hello, my name is Patrick. I have a question. Do you provide something to mirror the branch you just created on your local dev machine, so I can run it on my own machine, like for debugging, for example, if I like to attach a Xdebug or something?
Yeah, so it's possible right now to tunnel in and open up Xdebug, but it's kind of a pain. what we have on our roadmap is an actual development environment where you can code on the server, where you've got Xdebug ready for you with a very easy to access port, and also where you've got a number of common CI tools like Phantom.js that are there that won't be deployed onto your production. So it's like an environment that has the label development branch that's never going to be deployed exactly like that, but you'll have a different deployment process to go through deploying it into like a staging area and then production so that you can practice that, but it'll have some concrete differences between the environments here. So right now, the philosophy is that this master branch is the actual application that's running online, and that's where you can map your incoming URL and all of that. So that would never, you could never make that a development branch, but and probably like the penultimate branch, you could also not make a development branch because you need the consistency to have OCD. But we want you to be able to use Xdebug, and we also believe that every developer is going to always continue to develop locally. So we're also working on a version of our CLI tool that would respect the command platform vagrant up, and it will provision all of the infrastructure that that project has. You don't even have to know what it is, and your code, and mirror the data from production on your local machine. Maybe it needs to be sanitized. It'll do that for you, and then you're ready to develop with a complete copy of the application that's bitwise perfect, ready to be deployed, and you've got that locally with just one command. So we're working on that right now.
Thanks.
Other questions?
I have a question. So you mentioned that with Platform.sh it's really easy to push data down from production to development. What if I actually make some changes in the database in development and I need to push that back up? Do I have to script that, or does Platform also support some magic there?
Right. We don't have magic. In fact, historically we come from the Drupal world where there are clear ways to package up that type of change and send it along with the code. And as a result, the platform reflects that bias, that your schema changes are meant to be all scripted. In fact, that's the only way to make it repeatable and deterministic. So even for other applications, we recommend doing that. But I think the idea might be foreign to some of the other worlds out there. Like, I don't know if WordPress people do that, for example, or Joomla people, how they handle these upstream data schema changes. How do you guys do it? Is it something you typically script, or do you ever have a case where you take a dev database and deploy it over the top of a production database?
Yeah, I guess many, especially the Symfony projects, use Doctrine, which has Doctrine migrations, which basically boils down to similar to what you have with Drupal.
So it exports it into some marshaled code that can be scripted and imported.
Yeah.
Okay, well that should work perfectly. I've not tried it. Are there any remote questions in the Hangout?
Fribourg, Lausanne.
So I would like to point out that Leap and Platform.sh are partners officially, which means that anybody who signs up for an account on Platform.sh from your company will be given the permission to start development projects without incurring any cost. Typically, a development project would cost 10 euros a month, but you can do it for free. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested in doing that to give it a try. You can reach out to me or Andrew, or use the support ticketing here if you run into any problems. Try doing crazy stuff. Try to find out what it's capable of. We're still a young service. We've been actually hosting production websites for just about a year now. We're growing quickly, however, and we've been recently given a European Commission grant that funds our research and development for 2 more years. So we're going to be accelerating on that front, so expect really fun things there too. Good. Any other questions? Well, thanks for your time.